Every school has a ghost story. It's practically an unofficial part of the curriculum. You know, the kind the story whispered on the bleachers, or the dare made in a dark hallway after everyone's gone home. Our school, Northwood High, was no different. It was one of those sprawling, old brick buildings where you could practically feel the history soaked into the worn-out steps and carved into the ancient oak doors. Buildings like that are just fertile ground for ghost stories. And our ghost story had a name. We called her the Vengeful Spirit of North Hall. We were all completely terrified of her until we found her diary. This is our story of what happened and how the truth we discovered was more heartbreaking than any ghost story we could have ever dreamed up. The legend was pretty simple, which is what made it so effective. The story went that decades ago, a student was betrayed by her friends and, overcome with grief, took her own life somewhere in the winding corridors of North Hall. Now, her angry spirit roamed that wing of the school, looking for payback. It was a classic vengeful ghost tale, and we all bought it, hook, line, and sinker. The proof was everywhere, or so we told ourselves. The hauntings weren't loud or aggressive, but they were persistent enough to keep the story alive. In the west corridor of North Hall, the lights would flicker and die around the same time every evening, plunging the hall into a sudden, creepy twilight. Teachers said it was just faulty wiring, but of course, we knew better. In the empty classrooms, a door would sometimes slam shut with an echoing boom, even when there wasn't a hint of a breeze. And if you were ever alone in the hall, maybe grabbing a book you forgot, you might hear it, a faint, sad sound, like someone crying softly, that would disappear the second you tried to find it. Student folklore basically turned North Hall into a no-go zone after 3 p.m. It became a place for dares, a test of bravery for the freshmen. And the stories kids told just kept adding fuel to the fire. No one ever got hurt, but everyone had a story. A cold spot that seemed to follow you. The feeling of being watched from an empty doorway. The ghost was just a fact of life at Northwood, and we treated her with this weird mix of fear and respect. We never once questioned the story we'd been told. She was angry, she was vengeful, and she wanted us out. For my first couple of years at Northwood, the ghost was just that, a story. A bit of a thrill that made our old school feel more interesting. But that all changed in my junior year. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and my friends Liam, Maya, and I were the last ones left in the art room, frantically trying to finish a huge mural for the fall festival. We had special permission to stay late, and the rest of the school was dark and dead silent, except for the storm raging outside. We were in North Hall. Of course, the art room was at the very end of the west corridor. As night fell, the hallway lights started their usual flickering, but tonight it felt different. It seemed intentional. Instead of a random stutter, it was a slow, rhythmic pulse. On, off, like a deliberate, terrifying heartbeat. We tried to laugh it off, blaming the storm, but we all went quiet. Then, a paintbrush that was sitting in the middle of our big work table just rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. Nobody was near it. We all froze, just staring at the brush. My heart was pounding. It's one thing to hear stories, but it's another thing entirely to see something move on its own. That's when we heard the whisper. It wasn't the faint crying from the legends. It was a single clear word, carried on a draft that cut right through the warm air of the room. It was so quiet, I almost thought I'd imagined it. But then I saw the looks on Liam's and Maya's faces. They heard it too. Help. That single word was more terrifying than any slamming door. The legend said she was vengeful. Vengeance doesn't ask for help. Something was wrong. The story we'd all been telling for years suddenly felt like it was starting to fall apart. We packed up our stuff in a wild, silent rush, the fear so thick it was hard to breathe. We didn't just walk out of North Hall that night. We ran. A few weeks later, the school announced a massive clean-out day, Every department had to clear out its old storage closets. The art department's closet was a total disaster, a tiny, windowless room stuffed with decades of dried-up paint, forgotten art projects, and dusty canvases. It was our job to gut it. The closet smelled like old dust and turpentine. As Liam and I were moving a heavy stack of rotting canvases, my foot hit something loose on the floor. The linoleum was all cracked, and under a broken tile, I saw the edge of a wooden plank. Curiosity finally won out over our fear. We pried it up. Underneath was a little hollow space, and tucked inside was a book. It was a small, simple diary bound in faded blue leather, with the faint imprint of a flower on the cover. No name, no initials. It felt ancient. We knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that we hadn't just found some old forgotten school supply. We had found her. If you've ever had that chill run down your spine, that feeling that you aren't quite alone, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you believe there's more to these stories than meets the eye, make sure you subscribe, because what we found in that diary changed everything. We took the diary to the library, our hearts pounding, and gently opened it. The pages were yellow and fragile, filled with the delicate, looping cursive of a girl named Elara, with the first entry dated 1958. As we read, the monster we had created in our minds, our vengeful spirit, completely shattered, replaced by the heartbreaking reality of a lonely teenage girl. Elara's story wasn't about betrayal or anger. It was about crushing isolation. She had just moved to town because her father had gotten a job as a janitor at the school. In her diary, she wrote about how huge and scary Northwood High felt. She wrote about eating her lunch alone in the art room closet, the very closet we found the diary in, because she was too shy to face the loud, crowded cafeteria. She poured all her time into painting and drawing, feeling more at home with charcoal in her hand than talking to anyone. Her unfinished business wasn't revenge. It seemed to be a deep, unresolved longing for the connection she never found. And then we got to the entries that explained everything. The flickering lights? Elara had noticed the faulty wiring and worried someone would get hurt. She'd written, "Maybe if the lights go out, someone will finally fix it." The slamming doors? The art room was her sanctuary, and she liked to keep the window open for fresh air, which created a draft that would catch the heavy old classroom doors. And the crying? She wasn't crying. She was humming. She wrote about humming her favorite songs to herself in the empty halls after school to make the silence feel less lonely. That sound, muffled by walls and distance, had been twisted by decades of rumors into sobs of grief. The help we heard? In one of her last entries, she wrote about a huge painting she was working on. It had slipped, and she'd struggled to lift it, whispering for help to an empty room, just wishing someone, anyone, would walk by. Her death wasn't some dramatic, vengeful event. It was a quiet, sad tragedy. She fell ill with a bad case of pneumonia one winter. Her very last entry was about how cold she felt and how she hoped she'd be well enough to go back to school soon to finish her painting. She never did. She died at home in her bed, dreaming of the school that had become her whole world, a place where she was too shy to speak up. We just sat there in the library, the diary on the table between us, and we felt this overwhelming wave of shame. We had been so wrong. The entire school had been wrong. We weren't being haunted by a monster. We were being haunted by the memory of a quiet, lonely girl who just wanted to be seen. We carefully closed the diary and returned it to its hiding place under the floorboards, back in the closet that had been her safe space. But we couldn't leave it at that. We anonymously shared a version of Elara's story with the school paper, focusing on the tale of a lonely student from the past and suggesting a new welcome committee for new students. We never mentioned the ghost. We didn't need to. The point wasn't to expose her. It was to finally give her the connection she'd been asking for all along. After that, things in North Hall felt different. Maybe it was just in our heads, but the air felt lighter. The lights in the west corridor were finally repaired. The doors didn't seem to slam as much. That feeling of being watched was replaced by a sense of calm. We weren't afraid anymore. When we walked down that hall, all we felt was empathy. We had turned our fear into understanding, and in doing so, we hoped we had finally given her spirit some peace. Every school has its ghost story, but we learned that maybe we shouldn't be so quick to believe the tales we're told. It was a more exciting, more thrilling story to paint Elara as a villain. The truth was quieter, sadder, and so much more human. We thought we were being haunted, but really, someone was just trying to reach out. It makes you wonder how many other stories out there aren't about rage, but about a quiet sadness that was never resolved. How many spirits aren't looking for revenge, but are just looking for a friend? Elara's story taught us that sometimes the things we're most afraid of are just the things we haven't taken the time to understand. Share your own stories of misunderstood moments or unexplained events in the comments below. I try my best to read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that search for the truth hidden in the shadows. Until next time, stay curious.